We are going to look at the resurrection story today, of course. But we're also going to look at a story that takes place on either side of the resurrection. A little bit of the story before and a little bit of the story after. And in fact, I believe it's an important story for all of us because we are going to find ourselves in the story. We're going to see how we relate, how it connects to us, and what then it means for us. Because on Easter today, I don't want us to just come and go and have the cultural moment of I got to go to church and check the box off. I want God to speak to us today. I believe that God has a word for us. So are we ready? Come on, are we ready? We are going to look at the Gospel of Mark today. The shortest of all the Gospels. Let's look at Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might go and anoint him, that being Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, that's today, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll the stone away for us at the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here." Amen to that. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. This is the account we get from Mark. In fact, the earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark ended right there. More to the story was added later, of course, that was very true. Matthew, Luke, and John give us more details as well, but the end of Mark in its original context was right there. They left the tomb filled with trembling and astonishment. So on this Easter Sunday, before we try to explain the resurrection, before we try to find theological ideas and implications, before we wrestle with what it means for us, for you and for me, and the new life that we have, and the firstborn from the dead that Jesus was, before we think about all those things, which are important, I want us to first just be astonished and trembling. By the way, that's all you have to do. Let's be astonished at what Jesus has done for us. Let's be astonished that he was dead and now he is alive. Amen? They left the tomb astonished. It was about a week earlier that Jesus had ridden into town as king. We talked about this last Sunday on Palm Sunday. Jesus had a long pilgrimage all the way from Galilee, 100 miles north. Has made his way all the way down to Jericho and then up the steep climb, 3,000 feet, to the Mount of Olives, and then he sees the city of Jerusalem. A crowd had gathered with Jesus just 1 week earlier. And they were all excited for Jesus to be crowned the king. They shouted, "Hosanna!" which means God save us. They shouted, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They were long awaiting this king, this Messiah, this one from God to rescue them, and they thought this was the guy. This teacher, this rabbi, this young hotshot from Nazareth has come. He's performed miracles. He's healed people. He's in fact raised someone from the dead. His friend Lazarus had just recently been raised from the dead. They take off their cloaks and lay them down. He walks in and then he gets on a donkey and rides into town on the cloaks, and they wave their palm branches as they shout, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," knowing that this is the king. The Jewish people had waited a long time for a king. They had Herod the Great. They now had Herod's son, Herod Antipas. Those were the king of the Jews, but they knew that wasn't the real king of the Jews that they were waiting on. Jesus was coming in to be the king. I can't help but think about his disciples, who were excited, who were ready for this new king to take his throne. Likely they understood themselves to have some roles in his administration. Jesus would be king, and we're perhaps the top 12 that'll be in different positions of leadership throughout the region. No doubt they had these thoughts in mind. And think of all the good that Jesus can do as king. This is what they're thinking. Jesus arrives into Jerusalem, and the week starts to go by. Monday, into Tuesday, into Wednesday, now into Thursday, day after day this week. And yet the disciples are becoming a little bit perplexed because Jesus isn't quite doing what they thought he was going to do. He's not becoming king yet. In fact, Jesus would cause many disturbances, both with his words and with his actions. He said some challenging things, especially to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, this ruling elite council of the Jews. He would do some interesting things, right? He went into the temple and he flipped over the tables in the temple, this holy place. They said he was desecrating the temple. They said he was blasphemous. He kept upsetting his own people and the disciples and this crowd that had gathered and all that came down from Galilee that with Jesus that waved the palm branches are starting to wonder, okay, when is this going to get going? When is the revolution going to begin? When is Jesus going to finally take the throne? Because they all knew there was only one way for a new king to come into power, and that was to get rid of the old king. Typically by killing him and overthrowing in a violent revolution. And so they're waiting on Jesus to do this. Now, similar to John the Baptist, this happened earlier. The disciples were wondering, is this happening the right way? In fact, most of all, it happened with Judas. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples who would follow Jesus for 3 years. Judas kept waiting on Jesus to start the revolution. Draw the sword and get the army and attack the Romans. Jesus, you seem to be more upsetting the Jewish people, that's us, than the Romans who were in charge, who were occupying our land. Jesus, what are you waiting on? And Judas would make a crucial mistake. What we all know Judas Iscariot for throughout time. He would betray Jesus, but listen to this, we've talked about Judas before. He did not betray Jesus because he didn't love Jesus. He wanted Jesus to win, but he wanted Jesus even more to fight. Jesus just wasn't doing it. So he decided he would bring the fight to Jesus. He betrayed Jesus and he said, I'm going to back Jesus into a corner until he has nothing else left to do but respond and start this war, start this fight, start this overthrow of the Romans. So late on Thursday night, they'd already had supper together. Jesus has already sat with his disciples and had what we know of as the Last Supper. He's taught them many important things. He's washed their feet. He said some cryptic, interesting things. And then afterwards, they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And Judas arrives with the temple guards. Again, Judas wanted Jesus to start the fight, so we brought him the fight. And then Jesus did not respond how Judas thought he would. The temple guards arrive and everyone's ready for this showdown to take place. And astonishingly, Jesus doesn't do anything. He doesn't fight. This was the moment, by the way, if you're wondering. This was the moment to fight. And Jesus didn't. Peter, one of the 12 disciples, perhaps one of the leaders, you may say, of the 12 disciples, thought he might get things started. He reached for a dagger, draws it out, cuts off the ear of one of the temple guards, a man by the name of Malchus. Maybe this will get the revolution going. And Jesus bends down, but not to grab a sword, but to grab the very ear of Malchus, and he puts it back upon his head, and he heals Malchus right there on the spot. He looks at Peter and says, put down the sword. Peter, those who live that way are going to die that way. Peter, my kingdom is not going to break into the world that way. Yes, maybe all of the past kingdoms of the world have come that way, and maybe all the future kingdoms of the world will come that way, but this kingdom, the kingdom of Christ, will not come by violent coercive power. Put your sword down, Peter. And Judas and Peter and the rest of the disciples watch as they take Jesus away. Walking away into the darkness, going towards the city. It tells us all the other disciples fled. They ran. They hid. Peter, it says, keeps up with Jesus. He keeps a distance, but he keeps up with Jesus. He stays nearby to see what's going on. I'm thinking about the words that Peter had told Jesus earlier that night, seated around the table. If things go sideways, Jesus, I'm your man. I will fight for you and I will die for you, is what Peter tells Jesus. Peter's likely thinking of this because things have all of a sudden gone sideways. They're not going as they thought. Jesus is supposed to be the king. He just got arrested. He was betrayed by one of his own 12. What is happening? And Peter's thinking, okay, now's the time. He follows after Jesus, ready to fight and to kill. Matthew's gospel tells us, in fact, what Peter actually does. Matthew chapter 26. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a girl came up to him, a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he, Peter, denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Right? You're from Galilee. Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Peter, who was going to fight and to kill for Jesus, to usher in this kingdom that he was awaiting, instead denied Jesus, his rabbi. You didn't deny your rabbi. Never. He denied his friend. "I don't know him," he said. The night went on. By early morning, Jesus was before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The Roman governor who had the authority to kill or to release Jesus. Certainly, this was not going to take place as it was happening. Certainly, something would happen to rescue Jesus. Certainly, this wouldn't happen as we're thinking it's going to happen. Jesus is going to come through, and yet by 9 a.m., Jesus is being nailed to a wooden cross. At noon, darkness covers the land, and by 3 p.m., Jesus has died. It all happened so quickly. He had just ridden into town as king a few days earlier. He had great plans of all that was going to happen, at least the disciples did. Great plans and ideas of this kingdom come that Jesus was going to be king over, and they were going to have a role in this kingdom. And now so quickly, Jesus has died. This 3-year movement, marked by healing and teaching and authority, miracles, was over. It ended. Or did it? The women. Can we give a shout out to the women on Easter? The women stuck with Jesus. They were the ones, by the way, that stayed with him at the cross when the men left. The women, after they waited for the Sabbath to pass, as they would of course done with their custom, got up early on Sunday morning, the first day of the week. It's the very same reason that you and I gather at church every Sunday, because of this day. They get up early and go to the tomb and are shocked about what they see. They don't see Jesus as he's supposed to be. He's not there. And an angel says he's risen from the dead. And they leave astonished. I want to look at one verse from that gospel reading we read a moment ago in Mark. Mark chapter 16, verse 7 says this. This is what the angel tells the women. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Did you hear it? Go tell his disciples and Peter. Go tell those disciples, his students that have been following him for 3 years, go tell them that he's risen from the dead. Oh, and by the way, while you're there, why don't you go ahead and tell Peter also? You know, the Gospel of Mark, written by a young man named John Mark. We meet him in the book of Acts. He would interact with Paul and with Peter and many of the early church followers of Jesus, and his life would be changed. And he would then sit down and write this story of Jesus, the Gospel of Mark. What you may not know is that the Gospel of Mark is Peter's account. John Mark would go meet with Peter in prison, and Peter would tell Mark all of the stories of Jesus. And here's what Jesus did this time, and here's that thing he said that one time, and here's where we went that one time, and this happened, and this miracle, and that healing, and that teaching. The account from Mark in Mark's gospel, you may call it the Gospel of Peter, if you like. We call it the Gospel of Mark as he wrote it, but it's Peter's account. Now I want us to see something important. Peter no longer considered himself a disciple of Jesus. Go tell the disciples and Peter. That's what Peter thought. Peter no longer considered himself a disciple of Jesus. He had left. He had denied his rabbi. He had returned to his former life. Peter was a fisherman before Jesus came around, and now that Jesus was gone, he'd gone back to being a fisherman again. And this is where for us, for you and for I feel like we can lean in and identify with Peter. Maybe you had a moment in your life where you encountered Jesus, where you were close with Jesus, where you were on fire for Jesus, and then things didn't quite happen how you thought they might go. And now you look around at your life and you don't see much of Jesus. He's not really much part of your life anymore like he used to be. You used to be right there with him. You used to go to church all the time. You used to serve and to pray and to lead. And you used to do all these things. You used to call yourself a disciple. And now you look around and find that I don't know that I'm that much of a disciple anymore. Maybe it became too difficult. Maybe you just lost your passion. You were on fire. You were passionate about Jesus, and your passion faded away. Maybe you got stuck in a certain sin or addiction, and you felt ashamed. You felt disqualified. You hid yourself from Jesus. You ran away. It wasn't something he did. It was something you did. And in your sin, you walked away from Jesus. Maybe it was because of a sin. Maybe the busyness of life simply lulled you away. Maybe it wasn't a big significant moment or a sin. Maybe you just got busy with life and it slowly lulled and pulled you away from this passion you once had for Jesus. Maybe you've just returned to how you were before all this Jesus stuff. You were one way, you met Jesus, and you just kind of went back to how you were. In fact, maybe you're even here on Easter because you just simply feel it's an obligation. You got to go to church on Easter, of course. But maybe you don't feel close to Jesus today. I have some good news. Do we want some good news? Jesus wants you back. I don't want you to hear that from me. I want you to hear that from Jesus. Jesus wants you back. I don't know your story. I don't know all the ins and the outs of your life. I don't know how close you feel to Jesus. I don't know how you once might have been and now you're different than you were. I don't know all these things for you. But I do know one thing for certain. Jesus wants you back. Jesus wants to restore you. He wants to redeem you. I've shared some of my story before. In high school, I was passionate about Jesus, which isn't always easy to do in high school, by the way. But I was there. I was bringing my Bible to the lunchroom, praying, trying to tell people about Jesus, chaplain of the football team. I was doing all the Jesus stuff that I could do. Jesus had changed my life. I had encountered him, and I was radically different. And I thought, man, I'm going to go into the ministry. I'm going to serve at a church. I'm going to be a pastor. I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to do something for Jesus. He has captured my heart, and I want to go all in for Jesus. This is what I thought. And then I graduated and went off to college and lost my way. Lost my way. I went to college and failed out. Moved home. Great shame and embarrassment. It started a cycle in my life, a pattern of unfaithfulness, of shame, hiding. I would go back to school and then I'd quit. And I'd go back to school again and I'd fail out. Then I'd go take a job here and I'd quit. Then I'd go take a job over there and I would be asked to leave. And for a few years, this wasn't a few weeks, for a few years my life was circling the drain and I was going nowhere near where I thought I once would with Jesus at the helm. I remember after some time and some conviction and a little gumption, I said, you know what, I'm going to finally go back and finish school, finish college. And I went to a school about 10 hours away, 10 hours from home. People had kind of stuck their necks out for me to get me into this school, to give me one last chance to help poor Chris, who can't seem to find his way. That was me. And I went to this school, this one last chance that I thought for me to have a life following Jesus, to go into the ministry, to do the things I thought Jesus was leading me to do. And I remember Thanksgiving rolled around that year. It was the year 2006. And I made a decision that I was quitting. I don't remember how many times I had quit before, but I made the decision again I was quitting. I was giving up. I was going to move home. And it was in that moment I wasn't just quitting school, I was quitting all of this stuff, all this Jesus stuff. I was quitting it, I was leaving it behind. I wasn't going to be in the ministry, I wasn't going to be a pastor, I wasn't going to be a missionary. All that I thought could happen, I had given up, I quit, and I moved home. But Jesus wanted me back too. Jesus wanted me back. I love to think about the risen Jesus. He was in his resurrected body. This is a mystery to us, but we get a glimpse. It's what we long for and hope for us when we are raised on the last day, when we experience resurrection, which, by the way, as a Christian is our eternal hope, is resurrection and new life in Jesus. And the picture we get of that is in Jesus himself. He comes back, both physical and spiritual. Jesus in his resurrected body can walk through the walls, can appear and disappear, but he can also breathe the air and eat food. He is both physical and spiritual, and this is the picture we have with Jesus. And I think about all that Jesus could have done and all the places he could have gone when he came back from the dead. He could have gone to Herod or Pontius Pilate or any of those people that mocked him and said, "Ha! In your face. Look at me now." He could have gone anywhere he wanted. He could have gone to another galaxy, top of Mount Everest, the bottom of the ocean. And yet Jesus went back to his old neighborhood. He went back to Galilee. He went back to the place where he had ministered with his friends, these disciples, for 3 years. He went back to the Sea of Galilee. A few weeks after the resurrection, Peter had returned to being a fisherman, like I said. He was a fisherman, a commercial fisherman before Jesus. Jesus had died. He had denied his rabbi. He returned to being a fisherman. Some of the disciples, 7 of them in fact, had joined Peter, which I love. They stuck with Peter. Stick with people. They were fishing with Peter and they were out in the boat and they fished all night, and as the story goes, they didn't catch a single fish. And then Jesus arrives on the shore at early dawn. Shouts out, "Hey, did you catch any fish?" Jesus knew they didn't catch any fish. No. Cast the net on the other side of the boat. You know, Jesus had already done this once. He did this when he first called Peter and Andrew and them to be his disciple. And now he's doing it again. He calls them, and that's when John, who's on the boat, says, "I think that's Jesus. That's the Lord. Only he would do that little joke to us again." And what does Peter do? Peter, who's in his work gear, meaning he has his outer cloak off, he puts it back on, which doesn't seem to make any sense, and then he jumps straight into the water and swims 100 yards as fast as he can to the shore to get to Jesus. That moment hits me. He jumps off the boat, swims as fast as he can to get to the shore to get to Jesus. And there on the shore, they have this moment of restoration. Jesus could have gone anywhere and done anything, and yet he wanted to go be with his friend Peter. He wanted him back. Just like he wants you back, just like he wanted me back. He wanted to restore Peter. And they had this moment, this conversation, where he asked him 3 times, "Do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Do you love me?" He asked him 3 times, and it takes the place of his threefold denial earlier, where he says, "I don't know him" 3 times. Now he says, "I love you" 3 times. There's this moment of reconciliation. There's this moment of redemption. There's this moment where they come back together as friends, as God as his Savior, Jesus as his Savior and Lord. And there's this beautiful moment of restoration where Peter comes back. Not because Peter earned it at all, but because Jesus wanted him back. And Jesus pursued him. And Jesus showed up on the beach. And Jesus brought him in. And Jesus sat with him. And at the end of this conversation, at the end of this moment, John chapter 21, verse 19, the second half of this verse, at the end of this conversation, here's what Jesus says. "And after saying this, he said to him, 'Follow me.'" Follow me. I want us to hear it this way, because Jesus had already asked Peter to follow him. I want to hear it this way. Follow me again. Follow me again. Yes, you had once done it. Yes, you did a great job. Yes, you tripped and fell and stumbled and did wrong and terrible things. But follow me again. Maybe that's what you need to hear today on this Easter. Jesus saying, "Hey, follow me again." You may have had an encounter with me at one time. You may have walked away for a number of reasons. You may have looked around in your life and think, "I don't see Jesus around at all." I want you to hear Jesus today say, "Follow me again." Because what Jesus is actually asking Peter here is to be his disciple. Follow me, be my disciple. Peter had forsaken Jesus. Peter had denied Jesus. Peter had disqualified himself, or so he thought. And Jesus says, no. My love for you is greater than all that. See, that restoration moment was filled with love. That's why Jesus talks about love in that moment. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me, Peter? Not will you do all the right things? Will you preach great sermons? Will you do great ministry? Which Peter would go on to do. Peter, do you love me? It's love. The restoration was centered around love. And I want to hear what Peter said when he grew a little older. Peter would do some amazing things. You go read the book of Acts. Peter preaches great sermons and does many miraculous things. And Peter is a major character here in the first century, the early church. And about 20 years had gone by, and Peter would sit and write a letter back to the church. We know of it in our Bible as 1st and 2nd Peter. Reflecting back, I want us to hear what Peter has to say. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. He says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. And I can't help but Peter thinking about his sins, how he had denied Jesus, how he had messed up in such a big way. Love covers a multitude of sins. Keep loving. I pray that today we would be drawn into the love of God, drawn back into the love of Christ, that he would hear us say, yes, we love you. That we would hear him say to us, yes, I love you. Because love covers a multitude of sins. And I need this love to cover my multitude of sins. And I believe all of us need this love to cover our multitude of sins. Love covers a multitude of sins. Before we close, I want to just consider one quick thing. Someone I mentioned earlier in the story was Judas. Judas had a very similar story to Peter leading up to the crucifixion. Very similar, thinking very similar ideas and similar thoughts of the ways it was going to go down and what would happen and what Jesus needed to do. And they were there with Jesus for 3 years. Judas and Peter were very, very similar before the crucifixion. And their stories could not be more different after the resurrection. Peter hung around. He stayed with some of the disciples. He was there to receive the forgiveness of Christ and be restored by him. Judas hid in his shame, and his shame led him to take his own life. We don't see Judas in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, leading in the church, and he could have done it. Jesus would have forgiven him and restored him in the same way. In the same way. So for us on this Easter, as we bring this to a close, we can choose to be like Judas and hide in our shame and say, we are disqualified. I'm too far gone. I gave Jesus a chance. I ran from him. I left him, and he surely doesn't want me anymore. And we can end it. Or we can be like Peter. Come back to Jesus. Follow him again and let Jesus use us, you and me, in miraculous ways. I believe he can do it. Jesus is alive, and he wants you back. Amen.